on a tax increase to fund a museum documenting the U.S. Marshal Service. I'll tell you about that, more about that. The interesting thing is it was always supposed to be a privately funded endeavor, and now they're going to the taxpayer to support it, all in the name of tourism. I don't know about you. I don't know how many people are going to go to Fort Smith to, see an exhibit or a bunch of exhibits about the U.S. Marshal Service. I mean, the U.S. Marshal Service is awesome and everything. Don't get me wrong. Pretty cool stuff. But anyway, we'll talk about that. There's been some controversy over there in Fort Smith over this issue because anytime you go back to the people and you ask for more money, even if it is a temporary tax increase. Of course, is it temporary? In 2012, the people of Arkansas voted for a temporary sales tax increase to fund for certain road projects, and now they're talking about not allowing it to sunset in this legislative session. So we'll talk about that. Also, here in just a minute, we'll go over some of the national news. The government's still shut down, people getting antsy, and Roger Stone, the president's associate back during the 2016 campaign, has been indicted. A middle-of-the-night raid. Was it 6 a.m.? I'll have to look at the headline. Middle-of-the-night raid, and CNN just happened to be there with a camera. We'll start the show in 10 seconds.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Friday to everybody out there. And as always, it is Johnny Cash Friday, where we, try to listen to as much Johnny Cash music as we can, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day. I was just telling the online audience a little bit about what we got coming up on the program today. Talk a little bit about a Fort Smith tax increase. It's always interesting when local governments want to tax the people. It's actually, I think it's the easiest way to defeat a tax increase is locally. That's just me. Telephone number this morning, 870-275-9799. If you want to contribute to the program, 870-275-9799. As far as the Arkansas side of things is concerned, the 92nd General Assembly yesterday, not very eventful, but I'm going to share with you the most eventful thing that took place coming up in an hour. 7:05, we're going to peek into the room, go back in time, if you will. Thanks to the streaming of Senate committees, we can now hear the entire debate yesterday over Convention of States. Now, it did pass in the afternoon. They amended the Convention of States bill. This would be the Article 5 Amendment Convention. It has passed the Senate committee, Senate state agencies. Is it state agencies? Is that the committee, Joe? I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now. Okay, yeah, that's what it is. So it passed out of that committee yesterday afternoon, but they heard the bill yesterday morning, and they wanted an amendment. And from my understanding, the amendment would be to for the state to be able to recall whatever delegate they send to a theoretical amendment convention if that person is pursuing ideas that the people back home don't like. So they have the recall authority. So there's that. We're going to go over it all. The reason I want to go over it is because former United States Senator Tom Coburn was there in the room, and he spoke, for the bill. This is something that he's been working on for a long time, and it's got very mixed. There are very, strong opinions on both sides, and I realize that and everything else. I'm just telling you. I'm just here to tell you what happened. I'm here to tell you what happened yesterday at the Capitol. So. We'll get to that coming up at 7, and I just want you to hear and listen to what the debate was, because it's pretty fascinating stuff. Folks, in other news this morning, Trump associate Roger Stone has been arrested on 7 counts. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, has finally gotten around to indicting Roger Stone. Now, this is nothing. Now, let me just tell you right now, this is going to be wall-to-wall coverage all day. If you listen to any mainstream media outlets, they are going to have a fit. Oh, what a difference a week makes. Now, before you hear anything else, you need to hear this. Roger Stone has publicly been saying for months now he expects to be indicted on some sort of process crime in an effort to get Roger Stone to testify against President Trump. He has said this over and over and over again. He has been waiting to be indicted, okay? So there's no surprise here. But I would remind you that almost a week ago, or is it exactly a week ago, Robert Mueller came out and debunked a BuzzFeed story that popped their little, Russia collusion balloon. It wasn't even a Russia collusion balloon. It was an obstruction, or it was a perjury balloon. BuzzFeed said that President Trump instructed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress. It made no sense at the time because President Trump's own son was honest and said the correct date about when the discussions about a potential building project in Moscow ended. And the media had egg all over their face. And they were really upset because their hero, right, the prosecutor, the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, came out and basically slapped them down. And a week later, Roger Stone is indicted. They arrest him in the middle of the night. And CNN, get this, CNN happens to have a camera there during the raid. Now think about that for a minute. Is that not insane? It was a 6 a.m. raid in Florida. He's charged on 7 counts. One of them is obstruction of justice. Another one is false statements. Another one is witness tampering. And I should correct that. CNN aired footage of the arrest. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure they said in the coverage with Allison Camerata Singer, I'm pretty sure they said that they had a camera there. Is my understanding, according to Mediaite. Yes, it says right here, CNN exclusively captured, then aired footage outside of Stone's South Florida home. Okay, the short clip doesn't reveal much, but you can hear them say, FBI, open up. And, of course, everyone's going to act like this is a huge deal. But he's going to be in court today, Roger Stone. And I will just say this. I have watched the documentary Get Me Roger Stone on Netflix. Now, I suggested many of you watch it as well because, number one, it's just entertaining. And it's this documentary about Roger Stone in 2016 and the campaign and everything else, and his background, being a lobbyist back in the Reagan days, and everything else. I had some people say, Paul, that documentary, it was kind of crass and full of, bad language and everything else. So there's your disclaimer, okay? I mean, this is a documentary, and so people are going to say stuff. that maybe, you don't like. So I apologize if people didn't like, what I directed them to. But to me, it was just a fascinating documentary and, sort of like a political study. I've been saying for a long time, that documentary was just like, if you watch it in the context of Trump winning and beating Hillary Clinton, was just like a giant middle finger to the deep state and the establishment. And if you actually look at the players that are highlighted in that documentary on Netflix, it's essentially like, hey, come and get me. I mean, they're essentially like, hey, I dare you to do something about this. And so Roger Stone specifically, I mean, Paul Manafort is featured in that documentary. They got him, and now they're going after Roger Stone. And so to me, and listen, if you watch that documentary, you do not come away thinking in any way, shape, or form that, Roger Stone is a Boy Scout at all, because he's been in Washington, D.C. forever. He's been part of this situation, forever, the swamp, if you will, But just that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I'm just telling you, if you watch the documentary, you understand. So it's not a surprise to me at all that Mueller's been indicted. Here's the thing: where is the collusion? I mean, we have been talking about Russia collusion. This was also supposed to be about Donald Trump and Russia collusion, and we still have. And don't you know if they had anything, we would know it by now? You understand the government's been shut down for 30-plus days? I mean, Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Don't you know the world change, the changes that are happening, everything happening behind the scenes that Donald Trump is doing that we don't even know anything about? They are desperate to find something. Don't you know if there was anything there, we would already know about it? I mean, a week ago, the media and the left were devastated when Robert Mueller said, hey, I don't think this story that you're talking about is accurate. Trump did not do what you said he's going. And then all of their impeachment hopes were dashed. He must resign. All of that. No, it was done. And now a week later, they arrest Roger Stone. They indict Roger Stone, and CNN is there with a camera to capture the 6 a.m. raid. Man, that's awfully convenient, right? That's awfully convenient. And everyone's saying that President Trump is actually is losing the support during this shutdown over the border wall. He's losing support. That's what the polls say. Listen, the polls said Hillary Clinton was going to win. I don't know if I buy that he's losing support. I mean, maybe with some people, but I think he might be gaining more support, and I think people are sticking with him because I think they realize the absurdity of the leftist position. The leftist position here is absolutely absurd. It is absurd. Federal workers do need to be paid, but what would also be nice if the people who've been murdered by illegal immigrants were still alive. That would be. I think that's a much bigger issue. The fact because it exposes the fact that we can't control who comes into this country. That is insane that we can't control who comes in and out of this country. That's insane. That's not a nation anyway. What a difference. So. I mean, you tell me. You think Trump, especially based on the news today, do you think Trump is gaining support or losing support over the government shutdown? What do you think? Because now, after we've had a week of this Covington high school boy ridiculousness and the culture war is ramped up, once again, you've got at least half the country, saying that this, the media is exposed. They've got egg on their face. The media continues to be the story. You know what I mean? The media continues to get, and all of a sudden, oh, you know what? We've got something else. We've got a fresh hook. We've got a fresh lead. Now Roger Stone's been indicted. We have something to talk about for the next 7 days. We have something new to talk about. Again, never mind the fact that Roger Stone, again, who was indicted and arrested this morning, has said for months he's going to be indicted. The man has said this publicly for months. I'm going to be indicted. Matter of fact, even CNBC. Let's see here. Let me read this article for you. Roger Stone, longtime political advisor to President Trump, been arrested in a special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into election interference. Stone faces 7 counts. Oh, by the way, headline, Donald Trump ran for president to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. I bet you if you went up to college kids and you just said that statement, they would think that like a murder had been committed. Like they would think, oh gosh, just the way you phrase it. Did you know that Donald Trump ran for president to influence the outcome of the 2016 election? Uh-oh. The indictment alleges that Stone had been in contact with a high-ranking member of the Trump campaign about efforts to leak damaging information about the campaign of Trump's Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton. Stone will make an initial appearance 11 a.m. Eastern at Federal Courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Stone has been under scrutiny for months, but has maintained his innocence. He is one, and he, by the way, he has said that he's got emails to prove his innocence and everything else. He's one of the top subjects of the investigation into potential collusion between Moscow and the Trump campaign. Stone is also a former business associate of Paul Manafort, who headed Trump's campaign for several months. Manafort himself has been convicted of several federal crimes stemming from Mueller's investigation. But Manafort's convicted on stuff that happened decades ago. And you know what? If you dig into the past of Roger Stone, I bet you can find something, decades ago as well. Let's see. Stone, listen, even in CNBC, Stone had predicted that he would face charges or could face charges. He said he did nothing wrong, but contended to The Guardian that Mueller, quote, may frame me for some bogus charge in order to silence me or induce me to testify against the president. He's been saying this for months. Not to mention Roger Stone, if you've watched that documentary, has a tattoo of Richard Nixon in between his shoulders on his back. And anyway, so yeah, trigger warning if that triggers anybody. So, I'm not kidding. He's got a colored tattoo of Richard Nixon's face on his back, in between his shoulder blades. Anyway, telephone number is 870-275-9799. What a wild news day. Now, it is Johnny Cash Friday. We're going to take a break here. We're going to get to President Kennedy's April 27th, 1961 speech for our online audience and Johnny Cash for our terrestrial radio audience. We'll be back in just a moment.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate very much your generous invitation to be here tonight. You bear heavy responsibilities these days, and the article I read some time ago reminded me of how particularly heavily the burdens of present-day events bear upon your profession. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone-broke, and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Ingalls ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeois cheating. But when all his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath to the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, revolution, and the Cold War. If only this capitalistic New York newspaper had treated him more kindly, if only Marx had remained a foreign correspondent, history might have been different. And I hope all publishers will bear this lesson in mind the next time they receive a poverty-stricken appeal from a small increase in the expense account from an obscure newspaper man. I have selected as the title of my remarks tonight, "The President and the Press." Some may suggest that this would be more naturally worded, "The President versus the Press," but those are not my sentiments tonight. It is true, however, that when a well-known diplomat from another country demanded recently that our State Department repudiate certain newspaper attacks on his colleagues, it was unnecessary for us to reply that this administration was not responsible for the press, for the press had already made it clear that it was not responsible for this administration. Nevertheless, my purpose here tonight is not to deliver the usual assault on the so-called one-party press. On the contrary, in recent months, I have rarely heard any complaints about political bias in the press, except from a few Republicans. Nor is it my purpose tonight to discuss or defend the televising of presidential press conferences. I think it is highly beneficial to have some 20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor, finally, are these remarks intended to examine the proper degree of privacy which the press should allow to any president and his family. If, in the last few months, your White House reporters and photographers have been attending church services with regularity, that has surely done them no harm. On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever be a Secret Service man. My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. So now I see, hang on one second. Am I reading this right, that this is the big smoking gun? Or not really, the Daily Beast. Trump campaign official was directed, hang on, let me read this to you again, directed to ask Roger Stone about WikiLeaks dirt on Clinton. So, and directed is in quotes, meaning that's from the indictment. So there was a campaign official that directed Stone to ask about potential WikiLeaks dirt on Clinton. Man, aren't you glad that we got those WikiLeaks emails? I mean, is it really, don't you love that you have more information and not less information to make your decision on the 2016 presidential election? I mean, I certainly do. I think it's fantastic. There's a lot of stuff in those emails that raise, just show you exactly who the Clintons were, who her campaign was, and everything else. Pretty interesting stuff. I'll tell you this. I mean, I thought in politics that was the whole point, was that you do opposition research. I'm just wondering here if I don't know where there is no collusion. I don't even think in this indictment. I mean, there's nothing referenced here. Again, it's just something else. And Again, Roger Stone has said for a long time that he expects to be indicted on something that he claimed would be bogus. Now, I mean, we'll see what it is. Who knows? I just think this is interesting. Like, where's the Russian collusion? I mean, is it Stone now that colluded with the Russians? Is that what we're to believe? That's not in the indictment from what I can tell in this early morning. But they're saying somebody in the Trump campaign now directed Stone to ask about WikiLeaks and do opposition, from what I can tell, opposition research. If winning an election based on opposition research is a crime, then basically we'd have to put all of D.C. in jail. Or not just D.C., anyone. I mean, people do opposition research all the time. As a talk radio host, I've actually been handed, this happened a long, long time ago, but as a talk radio host, I've actually been handed a binder by some, people sometimes send me stuff, I was handed an entire binder one time. It was a big race, big candidate of opposition research. If that's a crime, I mean, anybody in politics has got to go to jail, I guess. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, it's just nuts. Where's the Russia collusion here? I don't know. Telephone number 870-275-9799. Get ready. It's going to be a whole weekend of Donald Trump as a KGB agent. Also, he's a Nazi. So, there's that as well. He's like everything, you have a nightmare, all of those nightmares put together. That's who Donald Trump is. At least that's what we're going to hear. Get ready for the Sunday talk shows. It'll be doozies. Back in a moment.
20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor, finally, are these remarks intended to examine the proper degree of privacy which the press should allow to any president and his family. If, in the last few months, your White House reporters and photographers have been attending church services with regularity, that has surely done them no harm. On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever be a Secret Service man. My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security, a challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war...
We're going to stop here. Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. We got pretty much a lot of news. I mean, you can talk about what happened on the national scene or what is happening, forever. You really could. Just a few headlines here. Former state senator Gilbert Baker has pled not guilty to corruption. This had to do with a bribe that Judge Mike Maggio said he took and pled guilty to taking, is in jail for lowering a nursing home judgment by, several $1 million. Gilbert Baker allegedly is the courier and the one that's delivering that money, and he was indicted a couple of weeks ago. Gilbert Baker now pleads not guilty to corruption. That's up at conduitnews.com. Also yesterday, the microchipping prohibition legislation passed the Arkansas House of Representatives with 84 yes votes. I mean, there was just no dissent. You could tell people thought this was something to do that was proactive. So yeah, that's the news, and we're going to get to a little bit more of that coming up at 7:05, where we're going to talk about the Convention of the States, the Article 5 Amendment Convention. That bill passed out of a Senate committee, and there was a debate yesterday, and thanks to cameras, we can bring you that, and you can hear not only how the process works, but you can hear the issues discussed. Former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma was in Little Rock yesterday testifying for that bill, and I want you to hear that as well. Folks, we're going to now kind of use our magnifying glass, and we're going to focus in on the citizens of Fort Smith. And there is a special election, as I understand it, that is coming up to vote for a tax increase in order to fund a museum. It belongs in a museum. Here to talk more about that, I want to introduce you to Fort Smith resident, Mr. Robbie Wilson joins us. Robbie, how are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you coming on the program to talk about this. I guess in order to educate our statewide audience, can you just bring us up to speed, maybe start at the beginning? What has brought the city of Fort Smith to potentially raising the taxes on their citizens?
Well, from the beginning, this Marshall's Museum project was conceived as a private project that would be contributed to by wealthy benefactors all over the country, and has been touted as a great thing for the River Valley and sort of the centerpiece of downtown development, or redevelopment, I should say, in Fort Smith. And what I'm hearing on the ground from a lot of people is that they're not against the idea of having the museum in Fort Smith. It's just the idea of the taxpayers footing the bill for it in the 11th hour.
Okay, so this is a museum that's going to just highlight, pay tribute to the United States Marshal Service. And, you know, Fort Smith is obviously, because of the history there, is an ideal location for the museum. That's kind of the general consensus, right?
Yes, that's correct. And, you know, like I said, for 12 years, the private funders have been trying to raise the money, and it seems like this is a push at the 11th hour to, I guess, to give this burden over to the taxpayers. And, you know, from my perspective, I'm independent in my views. I kind of even lean to the left, unlike some of your viewers or your listeners. But what I can say is that people are united about this local issue, about how the rich shouldn't be asking people who are struggling under high utility bills, struggling with high water bills, just trying to live their lives to pay for this private special interest project. It just doesn't sit well with me, nor does it sit well with a lot of other people in Fort Smith.
So what would the tax increase be? What are we talking here?
Well, this would push Fort Smith's sales tax rate, when it's combined with the city, county, and state, up to 10.75%. We're inching towards 11%, which,
oh my gosh,
is an oppressive sales tax rate, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You know, once we break that 10% threshold, people will really feel it in their bank accounts, and it will kind of desensitize people, maybe traumatize people when they're trying to buy groceries, for example, or medicine.
Yeah.
We just can't set a bad precedent like this by funding private businesses that heavily with tax dollars.
Okay.
The city can't afford it.
And this is a special election and coming up in March, correct?
That's correct. And how they ended up getting the special election is they went to city board members, evidently, and convinced them that they didn't have to do but one reading of the city ordinance. And the only way, typically, that you can get an ordinance to raise the sales tax is through petitioning, you know, to put it on the ballot. Mm-hmm. They didn't do any of those steps. It would have taken a lot of legwork on their part and some time, but instead they used their outsized power that they have because they're very wealthy, and they seem to have a lot of influence over the city board of directors. They were able to get them to vote to change their own rules so that they wouldn't have to read the ordinance. And there were other ordinances that they have to pass in order to make this work. Another thing is creating a public facilities board, which would essentially deprivatize the museum and set up a new board that would oversee the running of the museum after this passes, which hopefully it will not.
Is this the same Fort Smith government that brought us the River Valley Sports Complex and Jake Files, you know, convicted felons, former Senator Jake Files?
One and the same, yes, Paul. That's the same Fort Smith.
And that was some sort of public-private marriage in some way, right?
Yes, I don't know all the details of what happened with that, all of the nuances that were going on behind the scenes, but I can tell you from just the perspective of an average person that it seemed like we had a few developers who were trying to get the city to form a partnership with them so that they could fund this project. You know, it's a smaller scale project than what the Marshall's Museum was, but the mechanism is the same, and it's wrong.
I just want people to know, like, out of all of the out of all the texts and stuff and context I get, and those of you who are listening on KFPW right now in Fort Smith, the Marshall, I get so many communications from people in Fort Smith. Just they talk about the corruption or alleged corruption in their own local government. I can't tell you how many people text in about that. And I know that's not what we're talking about specifically, but I just wanted to say that to the listeners out there who are listening. I hear you. So this is interesting. I want to know. This was originally a private endeavor, and they're saying, listen, we're going to privately fund a museum to commemorate the United States Marshal Service. And now all of a sudden they're going to the taxpayers because they don't have the money to build. So what happens? I mean, who owns this? Is the city now going to own the museum? Is there still a private entity? Let's say the tax passes. Hopefully it won't. But is the city going to own the museum? Is there still a private entity that's going to be making money or profit off of the people that come and visit the museum?
Well, it will not be owned by the museum if the Public Facilities Board owns it, to answer your question. They're trying to create the Public Facilities Board so it can own and oversee the museum, which would be leased from the Public Facilities Board. It's very convoluted, and I'll tell you, I think that I've figured out one of the reasons why they're doing this, and it has to do with municipal bonds, and they talked about this in an informational meeting they had on Wednesday, and they said that in the future, in order to cover some of the upkeep costs for the museums, they may have to ask for municipal bonds. And as we know, private companies wouldn't be able to ask the city to issue bonds. But a Public Facilities Board, on the other hand, could. So it seems to me like this is planning ahead so that in the future they can ask the taxpayers for more money for their private project.
Robbie, you are exactly right. That is exactly what they're doing. And you know, we've talked about many times, we always talk about how bond issues are debt, and that is actually a way to, I think it's all about future tax increases. And this is kind of coincidental because we have a tax increase in March that could potentially lead to more bond issues, and I think bond issues leverage your city government to where if there are tough economic times, they're going to go back to the people to raise taxes again so that they can service the debt. I mean, that's always the potential there. And so this is just fundamentally a growth in the size of Fort Smith's government and positioning it for more growth.
Well, it's certainly going to lead to some inflation in the downtown area. And some people may wonder, well, why does he say inflation? Well, I'll tell you why. When you take an area that is older and the property values have gone down over time, and I'm an accountant by trade, so I know a little bit about this. When you have low property values, you can go in and spruce the place up, do some redevelopment, refurbishing of buildings, and that will cause property values to increase. And so I think that part of the overall plan is that they're going to use the museum and some other projects that we haven't even conceived of in the future in order to raise these property values so that the owners can flip their properties later for a lot more money. And that's going to push older businesses out, maybe, that don't have as much money. It'll push poor people who live in the area out because they can no longer afford to live there. And the people who stand to gain from all this, don't be fooled, are not the citizens themselves, but just the investors in that area.
Exactly.
And I think it's wrong for the wealthy to use the government and their power over elected officials because they're so wealthy in order to get everything they want. That's just fundamentally wrong in my view.
But it happens all the time. I mean, in the form of corporate welfare. And I want to remind everybody that, issue 3, which is, there's been a couple issue 3s, but the one that they touted as a jobs amendment, a couple of years ago, it actually opened the door and it allowed local county and city governments, to potentially finance bonds the way the state does when they have these super projects. And I mean, it is just an absolute nightmare. So we're talking with Robbie Wilson. He's a citizen of Fort Smith. You also heard he's an accountant. Robbie, I want to know how much money they're trying to raise from the taxpayers of Fort Smith to pay for this museum. What do they think it costs to build this building?
Well, that's a great question, and it's the $1 million question, or I guess we call it the $53 million question, which is the final number that I've heard that it will cost to construct the entire thing. Not just the building, but to put all the exhibits and displays in the building. And I'd like to point out that this has been going on for 12 years, and it took them 12 years to get what they say is $35 million. So they're not even after 12 years to the finish line, and they admit that the admissions and revenue projections that they have acquired from a company that they hired, which is another story, will only cover about 75% of their expenses, and that's using an inflated number of 125,000 visitors every year. I question that too.
So they think,
I don't think
hang on,
it'll
they
draw.
think once this museum is open, that 125,000 people a year are going to come to Fort Smith to study the U.S. Marshal Service?
That's what they say. That's what the company that they hired, which is based in the United Kingdom. They're not from Arkansas or from Fort Smith.
I saw that. I saw the Times record. They're from London, right?
That's right, yes.
So they've got a London company planning a museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas. What sense does that make?
Well, I've asked that question myself. It makes no sense to me because, and no offense to anyone from London or our friends across the pond, but I don't see how they would ever know what the people of Fort Smith are like and what people in this region like to do. It's just number crunching for the sake of making their case that it could draw so many people, which I don't believe that it will. It is such a niche market. The U.S. Marshals Museum will tell an interesting story, I'm sure, but how many people are really interested in hearing it, first of all, and look how long it's taken them to raise the money that they have. It doesn't seem to me like there's a lot of interest
No, it doesn't.
or demand for this. The market has said, well, the market just isn't there for it. The market has said that there's not a chance that this thing could ever sustain itself.
Is that do you have the name of that London company that they're using to design all this? Do you remember that?
Yes, it's LDP, Leisure Development Partners.
Okay. Do you know any of the other work they've done by chance?
Well, I can't think of any projects off the top of my head that they have done that I can recall, but it seems to me that they've done a lot of work all around the world.
I thought they had. Somebody told me that this is the same company that designed the Harry Potter portion of the park at is it Universal Studios? Is that right?
Well, that is where Harry Potter, or the Harry Potter park is. That's not the same company. There's another company that's involved with the museum, actually, called Thinkwell, and they're the company that designed part of the Harry Potter Museum, or Harry Potter amusement park, I mean.
And what does that company do? How is Thinkwell? So it's Thinkwell that designed. So how are they connected with the U.S. Marshal Museum in Fort Smith? How are they connected?
Well, they've been hired, from what I understand, to come up with exhibits which are interactive to create an experience for people, kind of like you might get at Disney World or at the Harry Potter amusement park.
Oh, so that's why they got to go to the taxpayers. I mean, this thing is getting
ridiculously
it's very
expensive.
Yeah, very expensive. Okay, Robbie Wilson, we're running out of time here. Real quick, tell the people listening in Fort Smith, once again, when they need to go vote against this ridiculous tax increase. And so give them the dates.
Well, early voting will start on March the 5th, and the election is going to be March the 12th, and you can vote of course, early. I suggest that you all get out and vote early on the first day. Vote no and tell these private investors that they need to keep their project private, because the Fort Smith citizens can't afford to be left holding the bag on another project that is likely not to succeed.
I agree.
So please go out and vote no.
So, Robbie, what we're going to do is this interview that we've just done is going to be clipped into a separate YouTube video. We're going to send this out to as many people as we can in the Fort Smith area. But then I also would love to have you back on specifically when we get closer to this special election and early voting. Does that sound good to you?
I'd be glad to. And can I say one thing before we go?
Yes.
Thank you. I've had a great experience working together with people in Fort Smith who I would never have worked with before.
We have 20 seconds.
We've attracted a broad coalition of people from the right and the left to come together on this local issue and show people that we can actually work together to solve our problems. And this is just the beginning. So thank you so much, Paul.
Absolutely.
Have a great morning.
That's very well said. Robbie Wilson, everybody from Fort Smith. We're going to take a break. Back in a minute.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
To the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covet.
As we wind up this first hour, I am grieving for people in the state of New York. Their leadership, folks, is morally bankrupt. They're savages. Andrew Cuomo, the governor there, says that pro-lifers are not welcome in the state of New York. If you're a New Yorker, I couldn't live in a state. I would leave. Anyway, we've got one more hour coming your way next.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
War has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security. And the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion. For the facts of the matter are that this nation's foes have openly boasted of acquiring through our newspapers information they would otherwise hire agents to acquire through theft, bribery, or espionage. That details of this nation's covert preparations to counter the enemy's covert operations have been available to every newspaper reader, friend and foe alike. that the size, the strength, the location, and the nature of our forces and weapons, and our plans and strategy for their use, have all been pinpointed in the press and other news media to a degree sufficient to satisfy any foreign power, and that in at least one case, the publication of details concerning a secret mechanism whereby satellites were followed required its alteration at the expense of considerable time and money. The newspapers which printed these stories were loyal, patriotic, responsible, and well-meaning. Had we been engaged in open warfare, they undoubtedly would not have published such items. But in the absence of open warfare, they recognized only the tests of journalism and not the tests of national security. And my question tonight is whether additional tests should not now be adopted. That question is for you alone to answer. No public official should answer it for you. No governmental plan should impose its restraints against your will. But I would be failing in my duty to the nation in considering all of the responsibilities that we now bear and all of the means at hand to meet those responsibilities if I did not commend this problem to your attention and urge its thoughtful consideration. On many earlier occasions I have said, and your newspapers have constantly said, that these are times that appeal to every citizen's sense of sacrifice and self-discipline. They call out to every citizen to weigh his rights and comforts against his obligations to the common good. I cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Happy Friday to everybody out there. It is Johnny Cash Friday. We're going to get to that music here in just a moment. For all of you listening, thank you so much for being with us. The intersection of conservative ideas and reality, where we are building a liberty machine. We had a good first hour. We talked to Fort Smith resident Robbie Wilson about a U.S. Marshals Museum in Fort Smith. They're trying to raise taxes on the people to pay for it. You got to check it out. I mean, it is certainly a microcosm of everything that, people are fighting when it comes to government that's, trying to grow. And, it's all good. And, you arrange it for the insiders to benefit. Anyway, you need to check it out. It'll be up at conduitnews.com later, or you can get the podcast. We also talked about the news that you're going to hear about for the next 7 days. Roger Stone, associate of President Trump, was arrested last night and indicted. The FBI went and got him at like 6 a.m. Eastern time, and he'll be in court today. We'll see. He hasn't been indicted on Russia collusion. He's been indicted on obstruction of justice, false statements, witness tampering. CNN happened to be there. CNN just happened to be there when Roger Stone was arrested with a camera. So, now, I know I said this at the beginning of the last hour, but I have to say it again. Flashback a week ago, They were going crazy over a BuzzFeed story, and Robert Mueller came out and exonerated President Trump of that story. Many people think that the BuzzFeed story was the result of a canary trap where the Department of Justice was trying to find a leaker, and they found one because they gave the story, or they give two different versions of a story to two different or multiple sources, multiple people in the Justice Department, and then it winds up on BuzzFeed. That's why the BuzzFeed reporters were sure that it was true, and then Mueller comes out and says, actually, that's not an accurate story, and boom, there you've got a leaker, right? Some people think that. Former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino thinks that that's what was going on. I saw a tweet of his last week. A week ago, that was going on. And now it's a week later, and they've arrested Roger Stone. They've indicted Roger Stone. CNN was there with a camera. And now we're back to Donald Trump being a KGB agent. I just find it fascinating. Oh, and by the way, they want you to think that Donald Trump is losing support during the shutdown. Roger Stone himself said that he was going to be indicted. But look for the Russia collusion. Go ahead and look for the Russia collusion in that indictment. I haven't seen any yet. So we talked about that the first hour. And we closed the first hour by telling you about this New York situation. I know you've heard about it. New York, the New York legislature is now saying they've passed a law that says we need to be able to we want it to be a constitutional right in the state of New York to kill a child all the way up to term. So essentially, I mean, why not go any further? Why not say that the child is not a child until you cut the umbilical cord? I mean, this is the party of slavery. The Democrat Party is the party of slavery. And they are still in the business of choosing who is a person and who is not a person. The Democrat Party used to tell you that if you were black, you were not a person under our laws. And now they tell you that if you're not outside the womb, then you're not a person. And they've got papers, these sickos, these heathens, they have papers that say that they should be able to take the life of a child. Now, technically, it was a study done in Australia, or a research paper done in Australia a couple of years ago, but until the child is sentient. So meaning like until they're 2. And that's when they said you really could just, it wouldn't be morally wrong if you took the child's life before it was 2, because you really wouldn't know that you're taking anything from it. I mean, these people are evil. This is what it is. I have no problem calling evil when you see it. And for those of you that might have trouble out there, calling the people of New York evil for doing what they're doing, the ones who are condoning this, the ones who voted this way, the ones who heartily approve of it, the thunderous applause after they pass the legislation, for that, folks, it is what it is. It is evil on display. And I am outraged, but I just pity them. I'm sick to my stomach. For my countrymen in New York. And if you actually look at a map of New York and you look at how many counties are red versus how many counties are blue, there are way more red counties in New York than there are blue counties. But of course, you've got the population centers that swing everything to the left. But it is just, if I was living in New York, if I was living in the state of New York right now, I would consider moving. And I really just wonder, not just because of association, just like I don't want to be, like, I would be so disgusted. It would just be because I just don't think I can live in this environment anymore. I mean, you know, it's just awful. It's absolutely barbaric. I've done segments before comparing abortion to traditional human sacrifice, because that's exactly what it is. We like to think that we're evolved. We like to think that we're progressive, and we are changing the nature of man. But no, not really. Not really at all. This is really no different than you can track it back to Baal worship, where they would terminate pregnant, or they would sacrifice children out of convenience, but they'd have these ritual. It's ridiculous. You can take it all the way back to the sacrifice of human beings in high places down in South America, on the ziggurats and that sort of thing. We're no different. We're still the same. We like to think of those, though they were barbarians. I'm pretty sure they thought they were the smartest people to ever exist. Just like we think we're the smartest people, that we know everything there is, and we don't. We don't at all. If you want to know that the human heart doesn't change, if you want to know that that's one thing that's constant, that a piece of legislation is not going to perfect man, and that's what our founding fathers knew so well. Just take a look at New York. They are showing you everything you want to know about the heart and the human condition right now. It's just really, really sad. It turns my stomach, and it makes me want to break down and cry. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. Telephone number 870-275-9799 if you want to contribute to the conversation, 870-275-9799. We're going to get to the Convention of the States here in just a moment, what happened at the Capitol. Nancy Pelosi, though, just to give you some news, has rejected Trump's down payment for the wall proposal. They're trying to get the government open, folks. So Trump told reporters at the White House yesterday that he had a number of alternatives for reopening the government with funding for his border wall. Among them, he said that Democrats need to agree to some sort of prorated down payment on the wall. He did not put a figure on the request. Now, this is while there's now like a bipartisan group in the Senate that are trying to get the government open, and they say, and Lindsey Graham, I think, is one of the ones leading the charge. And Lindsey Graham is saying, look, we can give you money for this, we can give you money for that, but you're going to have to give us some money for a barrier, to construct a barrier. And I think there are some Democrats in the Senate that are receptive to this. So we'll see what happens. People are starting to get real antsy. The government being shut down this long. Polls say that Trump is losing support. I don't know if I believe that. I really don't. I think the Democrats' position here is ridiculous, even with the mainstream media covering for them. Can you imagine what would happen if the mainstream media was not so pro-Democrat and pro-leftist? If they just accurately framed why the government shut down? It just wouldn't even. And I think even then, people are seeing this for what it is. Nancy Pelosi, the American. Just listen to this. This is who we have. Will you play this video for me, Joe? Nancy Pelosi repeatedly tells mayors to clap for her. Did you see this? It's from the American Mirror. I couldn't. Anyway, just take a listen to this. This is who Trump
Thank you, Tom Cochran. That's an applause line.
Is that the American
I'll let you know.
Mayors Association Conference of the United States
With
Mayors.
strong border security initiatives. This will be our 10th vote. Do you want to? Let's hear it for border security.
I'm going to stop. Border security is immoral. If a wall is immoral, then border security is immoral. You don't support border security? Keep going.
The American people elected a House majority that would. That's an applause line. Not for everybody, maybe. And we will strengthen our democracy by passing the Equality Act. That is an act to end discrimination against the LGBT community. There are two challenges, actually three, that I want to just close with, and that is, here they are.
Oh.
We have to think in a very drastic way about this. We must embrace innovation, inclusion. We have to just establish your model that you have put forth here today. We're coming back to it here.
She's fumbling through
you
her
know
papers.
it. Infrastructure, innovation, inclusion.
I'm Kyle Olson. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos just like this,
So that
subscribe
is,
right here and visit the
That's the AmericanMirror.com They put together videos. That was a doozy. That was a doozy. All right, so let's go to break. We're going to take a break right now. Be back. When we come back, we're going to go over the Convention of the States bill that got out of Senate State Agencies Committee yesterday in the 92nd General Assembly. I'll let you hear the debate. Senator Tom Coburn, a Republican senator from Oklahoma, former senator, was in Little Rock yesterday. And that is probably the biggest development that happened yesterday in Little Rock. Back in just a moment.
Satellites were followed, required its alteration at the expense of considerable time and money. The newspapers which printed these stories were loyal, patriotic, responsible, and well-meaning. Had we been engaged in open warfare, they undoubtedly would not have published such items. But in the absence of open warfare, they recognized only the tests of journalism and not the tests of national security. And my question tonight is whether additional tests should not now be adopted. That question is for you alone to answer. No public official should answer it for you. No governmental plan should impose its restraints against your will. But I would be failing in my duty to the nation in considering all of the responsibilities that we now bear and all of the means at hand to meet those responsibilities if I did not commend this problem to your attention and urge its thoughtful consideration. On many earlier occasions I have said, and your newspapers have constantly said, that these are times that appeal to every citizen's sense of sacrifice and self-discipline. They call out to every citizen to weigh his rights and comforts against his obligations to the common good. I cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share, and that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial
All right,
and the sentimental.
we welcome you back from break. Thank you so much for being with us, as always. So yesterday, down at the Capitol, we had Representative Stephen Meek's bill to regulate the microchipping of employees, the forced microchipping of employees. It passed out of the House of Representatives with 84 votes, and we told you about that on Facebook. And the next most significant thing that I can tell that happened, I know there were some rule changes about impeachment processes and things like that. That's maybe a discussion for another day, because we're going to have to rehash all the times that Senator Trent Gardner has called for the impeachment of Judge Wendell Griffin. And I definitely think there's going to be more developments with that specific story as we move forward in the 92nd General Assembly. But this is a long time coming. There have been forces trying to pass a Article 5 Amendment Convention for a very, very long time. And it's gotten, through some of these processes before. But yesterday, former senator from Oklahoma, United States Senator Tom Coburn, was in Little Rock, and he was sitting right next to Senator Gary Stubblefield, who was running, once again, a bill to basically signify Arkansas's, I guess, amenable to going along with an Article 5 Amendment Convention to do things like set a balanced budget, set term limits, and other things. Thanks to the Senate transparency of putting cameras in the Senate committees, we have the audio and the video for you. We're going to take you to yesterday morning. This is the beginning of the debate on Convention of States. Listen, Senator Gary Stubblefield.
For allowing me to be here today. I appreciate it. It was 2 years ago that I introduced this same resolution to this committee and passed it out of this committee. And at that time, the national debt in our country was approximately $18.5 trillion. Today, it stands at $22 trillion. And what that means is, when you look up the number of households in the United States and you divide the number of households into the national debt, it comes to about $160,000 per household. That may not mean a lot to a lot of people. They may not really take that serious. But let me tell you a little story that happened to me last week. I was at a grocery store at a self-checkout line, and I was having a few problems because of the produce aspect of it, and one of the assistants came over and was helping me. And it was a young lady in her late 20s, early 30s, and I brought up the subject of high groceries. And she said, I completely understand. She said, I have 2 children. I'm a single mom. She said, I work 2 jobs. And she said, it takes everything I can make to get by every week. And as I drove home that night from the grocery store, I began to think about a book that I had read by a freshman congressman by the name of Ken Buck from Colorado. And when I read that book, he opened it up and telling about the extravagance and the opulence and all of the money that was spent in Washington, D.C., not on infrastructure, not on military affairs, but on parties, on taking care of the congressmen and senators going to events, millions and millions of dollars. And then I got to thinking about the $17 million that was spent by our Congress on mistresses that none of us know who they are. And I thought about how much of that money that they've thrown away in Washington would have helped this young lady and millions of others all across the country who are struggling. So let me tell you, what I surmise out of all this is there is two values in this country. There's one for Washington and there's one for Americans. And when you look at the first sentence of the Constitution, and by the way, the founders made it very plain. When they came out and they said that the powers delegated to the federal government are to be few and defined, those delegated to the states are to be numerous and indefinite. They made it very plain that the government was supposed to remain small, not centralized, not all-powerful. When I look at the first line of the Constitution, it says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress in the United States. Now, it doesn't take a political science PhD to realize that the federal government possesses only those powers herein granted. Nowhere in the Constitution there is no grant of power in the pages of the federal government to be involved in education, health, housing, energy, foreign aid, and a host of other areas.
All right, let's stop right there.
Each of you probably have a...
Pick back up. That's Senator Gary Stubblefield. We'll hear this full debate when we come back from the State Agencies Committee yesterday on this issue that has been, it's been really an issue for a long time. You know, I've talked about how maybe it is getting less attention now because President Trump is in the White House, but Senator Gary Stubblefield does raise some interesting, thought-provoking points about the national debt that used to be talked about all the time. Nobody seems to talk about the national debt anymore. Back in a moment.
Cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share. And that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices.
Right. Welcome back on this Johnny Cash Friday. Yes, it's really good. All right, we were just listening to Senator Gary Stubblefield, and we got some great comments about Senator Gary Stubblefield. Bob on Facebook saying that he knocked it out of the park. Dennis on Facebook writing, the collusion is between the states and the feds and their conspiracy to defraud the American people. Then we have some skeptical people. Reggie on Facebook writing, asking a question, how would the convention delegate be chosen? What special interest agendas would be represented? We do not have the statesmen of the past. We have the politicians who have helped create this mess. So the delegate selection process could easily be manipulated to ensure that special interests were represented. Well, let's listen to the debate because I think they addressed that. But let's continue. Again, a former Republican senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn, is the one sitting right next to Gary Stubblefield. But let's listen in from yesterday.
Pocket Constitution. It's just a small book that's got the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution in it. It's very simple. It's not very long. But if you order a Constitution from the U.S. Printing Office today, and Mr. Meckler, you can vouch for it, you will get a 2,700-page document that weighs 10 pounds. It will cost you $130. But on its spine, it does say Constitution of the United States of America. And what does that mean? It means that it has every court case that's ever been tried in the United States. And I want to do something this morning that may be a little out of line, but I want to read to you some of those court cases that are in that Constitution. Not that little simple book, but that 2,700 pages. Many of the policies we live under today were imposed not by legislators, but they were imposed by a judge. Abortion on demand was instituted by judges, not legislators. In fact, the Supreme Court had to change the abortion laws in 48 states, and when they struck down the anti-abortion laws to achieve its will. I want to read to you this decision that the Supreme Court issued in 1892. Just 127 years ago. No purpose of action against religion can be imputed to any legislation, state or nation, because this is a religious people, this is a Christian nation. The court provided over 80 different historical precedents when they made that decision. Fast forward to 1962. The Supreme Court first nationally implemented the agenda of public secularism when for the first time in American history, it ordered the separation of religious principles from education, ruling that from this day forward, it would be unconstitutional for a student to even pray voluntarily at school. No historical precedents were offered. Then in 1965, the court permitted prayers if they were silent. But in 1985, the Supreme Court ruled that even silent prayer was unconstitutional. I've often wondered how they could tell whether somebody was praying a silent prayer. And then the court broadened its prohibition to include Bible reading at school. And that's kind of ironic considering the fact that Congress printed the first English translation Bible to be used in public schools. How did they arrive at all this? They used the testimony of a psychologist who stated that the reading of the Bible in school could have harmful psychological effects on a child. So now we have a super school board of education for every school district in the nation. In 1980, the Supreme Court ruled that allowing students to see a passive copy of the Ten Commandments at school was unconstitutional. This is their decision. If the posted copies of the Ten Commandments are to have any effect at all, it will be to induce the school children to read, meditate upon, perhaps to venerate, and obey the commandments. This is not a permissible state objective. Now, isn't that amazing logic? Students can't see the Ten Commandments, even if they want to, for fear that they might obey religious teachings such as don't kill, don't steal, obey your father and your mother. And finally, I want to read you one more thing. These are all things that are included in your new Constitution of the United States of America. This is a 22-word prayer that caused voluntary prayer to be taken out of public school. We acknowledge our dependence, Almighty God, Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon our parents, our teachers, and our country. That simple prayer got voluntary prayer taken out of public schools. The same number of times that the Pledge of Allegiance uses the name God are in here. 1/4 the times it's used in the Declaration of Independence. Now, those words in the Declaration that say that we are all created equal and we are all endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that to secure those rights or to protect those rights, government is instituted among men. You know what that tells me about our government? That first and foremost, the purpose of the federal government is to protect our inalienable rights, our God-given rights. That's their first objective. That's what they should be doing. They shouldn't be in the public school system, and yet they tell me if you'll just follow the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, everything will be fine. 2,700 pages. There has been a continual degradation of the Constitution for the last 100 years.
Senator Gary Stubblefield.
I don't think there's any question we have an out-of-control federal government.
It is the convention.
65% of all state budgets are controlled by the federal government. If you walk down these streets today and you ask the average person, do you think our federal government is too big, too powerful, too involved in our life? 90% of them are going to say yes. And the other 10% are going to say, I don't know. And yet the founders gave us a way. They gave us an option to fix this. And I'm sure if they could be here today, they would be asking us, why aren't you using it? So these two gentlemen here, I want to introduce Senator Tom Coburn. Senator Coburn, if you want to.
I do. Senator Coburn, if both of you would please introduce yourself in the record. Welcome to Arkansas.
For the record, my name is Tom Coburn. I'm a citizen of the state of Oklahoma. I served in the U.S. Senate for 10 years, left 2 years early because I became convinced we're not going to see our problem solved in Washington. And all you have to do is look at Washington today at the polarization of both the parties. My first 2 years in the Senate, I offered about 160 amendments. I had 127 of them passed. The last 2 years I was in Washington, 3 amendments were offered in the United States Senate. That's just the superficial symptoms of what the real problem is. Our country was designed to accentuate freedom and responsibility. And our founders recognized 4 basic principles for us to be successful. And because of those 4 basic principles were enlivened in the populace, what we saw was the greatest, most powerful generation ever come to value. Was our beginning imperfect? Absolutely. Did we have conflict over that imperfection? Yes. But with the Civil Rights Acts and the additional amendments, what happened is we solved the grievous error that couldn't be solved at our founding. But today we lack, in a great many ways, the four key characteristics that our founders thought were important. And they recognized those as being important because they looked at every other republic that had ever existed. And they knew that all of those had failed over fiscal issues. So what were those four principles? Those four principles were virtue first. You can't have a free society when you undermine virtue at every angle, at every corner. And that's exactly what we've done through the overreach of federal courts in our country. The second is a limited government. We have anything but a limited federal government. The 65% that the senator referred to, of your own tax dollars that are controlled by Washington, are mandated through rules and regulations in that Constitution by people who were never elected to anything, federal bureaucrats. They actually tell your schools what to do. You don't get to decide. The federal government gets to, because you take federal education money. The third area is the rule of law. And if you look around our country and see how that's being diminished and not upheld and not respected, and what the viewpoint is of younger people in our country, what you will see is we are failing on that point. Whether it be following the law on marijuana, we now have 12 states that pass that, but it's still against the law in the federal. So why don't we just take it off the books rather than make the states complicit in violating federal statutes? And yet we're not enforcing laws. So if you have laws on the books you don't enforce, then you also undermine the rule of law because it doesn't mean anything. And then finally is economic freedom. This country led the world for 201 years as the leader in economic freedom. And that's defined by the ability to resource yourself with your own energy, intellect, and pride and go accomplish something that benefits you and those that are with you. We're now number 20 in the world. And when you go back and mine into why we're number 20, it's called regulation. It's not just federal, it's state too. There's all sorts of roadblocks to keep people from actually progressing and raising their own well-being. So at the end of 10 years in the U.S. Senate, I looked around and I said, how are we going to solve these problems? And I didn't see a solution, and I don't see a solution today. Whether it's the president we have or the Congress we have, both Senate, it's not partisan. It's an actual failure to govern. And so I left early because I thought we ought to be fixing the real problems. As a physician, I was trained to treat disease, not symptoms. And what we see Washington doing, whether it be our Congress, our executive branch, or the agencies, is they treat symptoms. And it's all about a correctness, not with common sense, but to protect the bureaucracies and the institutions, not to do what's in the best long-term interest of our country. And amazingly, our founders knew this would happen. If you go back and read what they read and what John Locke proposed, Montesquieu, and all the knowledge that they put forth as they developed our Constitution, in all the writings you see that if in fact we violate these principles, our republic won't survive. And so we now have $144 trillion in unfunded liabilities that's going to fall on our children and my grandchildren and their children. And what that really means to the millennial generation, if there's any millennials here, that's $60,000 in a decrease in standard of living over the next 50 years for your generation. Part of that's Generation X too, but then it's the generations that follow. Because we've not been responsible to do the best things for our country in the long term. So the solution to that is very simple and very straightforward. Our founders put it in our Constitution and said, When you get to this point, it's time for you to exercise where we think the power should be the strongest anyway in the state legislatures, your responsibility to fix this errant ways of our central government. And so we have the ability to do that. And so my question is if you don't want to do that, either you don't think we have any serious problems in our country that are going to impact our future and make us a second-rate power, because that's where we're headed. Just a side note, 10 years ago, the bid-to-cover ratio on U.S. debt was 3.8. Today, it lies at 1.58. As soon as that's at 1-to-1, we won't be able to borrow money, no matter what interest rate we pay. So we see this decline, and because the world recognizes that we will not have the ability to repay both what we owe today and what's coming in terms of unfunded obligations. And the real problem is nobody in Washington wants to make hard choices. What they want to do is continue with the same. I want to be a senator. I want to be in control. I want to be a chairman. But I'm not going to take a chance, and that's why we only had 3 amendments, because neither Leader McConnell or Leader Reid wanted any of their members to be exposed to a tough vote. Well, if you're a U.S. senator, one of the things you ought to get paid for is taking tough votes and being able to explain why you voted the way you voted. And if you don't want to do that, why are you there? So the real power lies in a committee and state houses just like this one in Arkansas. Because if we're to fix the problems in front of us, we need to call a convention of states to call on the federal government to start getting its act together financially. And we can force them to do that through an amendment to the Constitution and do it in a slow way, but make them make the hard choices. And it's not hard. The Government Accountability Office recognizes at least $400 billion of stupidity and waste a year. There's another $100 billion in fraud in Medicare. There's another $60 billion in fraud in Medicaid. So there's $560 billion if you just had somebody who cared enough would go away tomorrow. But the focus is on staying in power rather than fixing our country for our kids. So our founders gave us this tool, and all we have to do is utilize it. And my answer to your committee when I'm asked, well, what are the risks? There are risks. There's no question. My question is what's your plan to fix our country if you're not willing to do the wisdom of our founders that gave us this tool to solve this very problem, which every Republican history has encountered, and they didn't have the tools to fix it. We do. So my hope is that your consideration that this will come out of this committee, and that the question you'll ask yourself is, did I do everything I could to fix this country as a state legislator? My oath, your oath, is to the U.S. Constitution. And part of that's Article 5. Utilizing that to control and balance the relationships between the federal government and the state, and also the relationships between several branches of the federal government. I'm not worried about doing an Article 5 convention. I'm worried about not doing it. And with that, I'd yield back to Senator Stubblefield. By the way, I would just say that the Arkansas Republicans and Democrats alike, 68% throughout the state, support this Article 5 convention application.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Meckler speaks, I think we were going to have someone from the opposing, if there's someone signed up to speak against this bill, if they want to go ahead and speak, and then we'll let Mr. Meckler
all right, so that
finish up.
Let's stop right there. That was Senator.
Okay
that was former United States Senator from Oklahoma, Tom Coburn. The voice you heard before that was State Senator Gary Stubblefield, but Senator Coburn laying the case for how dysfunctional Washington, D.C. is, and how when he was first in the United States Senate, he had 127 amendments that were passed of his, and he only got 3 passed the last 2 years he was there because nobody wants to take a tough vote. He's saying that Article 5 is the option for the states to convene a convention of states to try to do specific things like pass a balanced budget amendment and things like that. Anyway, that was the debate yesterday in the state agencies committee. Later in the afternoon, the bill was passed with an amendment. I understand that amendment would give the state legislatures the authority to call a delegate back if they started doing things that were outside of their authority. But that did, in fact, pass out of committee with 5 yes votes, which is what it requires to pass out of a committee yesterday. And so now that will go before the Arkansas Senate at some point in the future, and we'll keep you updated. Folks, it's Johnny Cash Friday. This has been our coverage of the 92nd General Assembly in Arkansas, and enjoy the music. We'll be back in just a moment.
Cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question.
Production in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. Are you a conservative-minded young person and want to let the world know about it? Are you tired of rolling your eyes as your professor regurgitates progressive, PC, neo-Marxist nonsense? Then you should interview on Conduit News Radio's Young Conservative segment and tell us about why you believe the way you do. Tell us how you came to be a conservative and what are your views on government. Now, if you're worried that your neo-Marxist professor may also be a right-wing talk radio listening masochist, then names can be changed to protect the innocent. It's the Conduit News Radio Conservative Future segment. To be interviewed, call 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. Also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation an obligation which I share, and that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome
that's
it.
all the time we have.
This administration
for today.
intends to be
Wrapping
candid about its
things up,
errors.
folks. I mean, that was
For as a
really incredible testimony in the Arkansas legislature yesterday. But we did talk about throughout this show today. Roger Stone was arrested. FBI agents went into his house this morning, guns drawn, and a CNN camera was there, which is interesting. The question has to be asked, why were the CNN cameras there for an FBI raid? Former Fox News host Greta Van Susteren tweets, CNN cameras were at the raid of Roger Stone, so FBI obviously tipped off CNN. Even if you don't like Stone, it's curious why Mueller's office tipped off CNN instead of trying to quietly arrest Stone. Quiet arrests are more likely to be safe to the FBI and for the person arrested. Interesting. Where was the media a week ago? They had egg all over their face, right? But now Donald Trump is a KGB agent once again. Folks, Arkansas, have a great weekend. Be safe.